Uzi 9mm?
You know your weapons, buddy. Any one of these is ideal for home defense. So...
Movies Inside Out presents The Terminator is an American science fiction action film by James Cameron that marked the beginning of a whole franchise. The stories about the conflict between humans and machines were featured in several other films, comic books, and novels. In this video, we'll tell you how the iconic 1984 action film was created and why the word Terminator became a household name.
That Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with.
Before we move on with the video, I have some great news. As requested by our subscribers, we've launched memberships. If you become a channel member, you will get exclusive stickers, the chance to choose the next video, your nickname will be in the credits, and many other cool things. Subscribe, become a member, we'd be grateful. This will allow us to make more exciting episodes for you more often. Now, let's get back to the video.
The creation story. James Cameron claims that the idea for the Terminator came to his mind in a dream. When he was sidelined from working on his feature film directorial debut Piranha 2: The Spawning, he desperately tried to participate in the editing process and traveled to Rome where the work was being done. Having spent his last money on a ticket, Cameron survived on whatever he found to eat, and at some point he fell ill, most likely from eating low-quality food. In his feverish state, he dreamt of a metallic endoskeleton emerging from the fire and crawling on the floor holding kitchen knives. When Cameron woke up, he immediately made a sketch that laid the foundation for the future blockbuster. However, the image of a cyborg had already occurred to the young director. As early as in 1978, he made a short film called Xenogenesis, featuring cyberpunk images of a bare metal arm. The author conceived a futuristic science fiction story about a robot made of liquid metal capable of changing its shape. The setting should have taken place in the future, but James Cameron knew that he would have a limited budget, so he moved the events to the present and began to develop the concept of time travel. He was then contemplating the idea of two Terminators sent into the past. The first was a cyborg to be defeated by a human, and the other was a liquid robot. The director considered using clay animation, but realized that the technology of the time did not allow for the realization of the concept of the liquid Terminator. However, as soon as it became possible, Cameron revived the idea for the sequel, Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
So this other guy, he's a Terminator like you, right?
Not like me. A T-1000. Advanced prototype. Liquid metal.
James took the first plot outline and began working on the screenplay with his friend William Wisher, discussing the work daily over the phone. Wisher wrote the dialogue for early scenes with Sarah Connor and scenes at the police station, while Cameron focused on the rest. By the way, he based the concept of time travel on the idea of a closed time loop by astrophysicist Igor Novikov. The final version of his theory was formulated in 1984, just when the first movie was released. When part of the screenplay was ready, special effects artist Stan Winston joined the project. He created several sketches of the endoskeleton, but in the end, they still used Cameron's sketch as the basis. Gail Ann Hurd, who launched her own production company in 1982, was in charge of the script editing. It was she who bought the final script of The Terminator from James for just $1, with the promise that she would do everything to ensure that the film was made with Cameron as the director. Hurd kept her word, rejecting studios that wanted to get rid of the novice director, in particular Paramount Studios. But her name as the copyright holder of the script caused some confusion. James complained that people assumed that the idea of making a woman the main character belonged to Gail, although she hadn't written a single line. By the way, Cameron and Hurd started dating during the filming of The Terminator, and were married from 1985 to 1989, managing to shoot several more films. Some argue that The Terminator is essentially not science fiction, but a classic horror film. If you remove robots and time travel from the plot, it's easy to see parallels with slashers like Halloween or Friday the 13th. The Terminator is an unstoppable killer who pursues an innocent victim, and Sarah Connor is the final girl, strong enough to outsmart the villain. However, the director himself disagrees with this interpretation of his work. He classifies the Terminator as tech noir or technical noir, a term he has coined himself. The genre combines the old-school cruelty of film noir with elements of science fiction. The term appears in The Terminator for the first time as the name of a nightclub. Despite many of James Cameron's ideas for the Terminator being genuine, after all, he essentially created the blockbuster formula, the film's plot is not unique. A very similar story called The Most Famous Man in the World aired on the radio show The Mysterious Traveler in the early 1950s. But the biggest problem for the creators of the Terminator was the accusations of plagiarism from science fiction author Harlan Ellison. He sued Cameron for using ideas from episodes he had written for the 1964 series The Outer Limits, namely Soldier and Demon with a Glass Hand. Also, the concept of Skynet, an artificial intelligence system and the main antagonist in The Terminator, might have been borrowed from Ellison's story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The director believed that the writer's accusations were unfounded, but if he lost this case, he would bear personal responsibility for the financial damage. He couldn't afford that. Moreover, the producers insisted on resolving the dispute out of court, so eventually Ellison was credited as one of the authors of the plot. Casting. The casting began in late 1982, when film producer John Daly agreed to support the film with the help of the companies HBO and Orion. Initially, Cameron wanted to see the Terminator as an average person, not standing out in the crowd, so the role was intended for the star of psychological thrillers Lance Henriksen. By the way, he had already worked with the director on Piranha 2. According to an alternative version, the producers did not consider Henriksen's candidacy. The actor, at Cameron's request, came to negotiations with the film studio portraying the Terminator. He was wearing a leather jacket and black boots and had cuts on his head and middle teeth. 15 minutes before the meeting, he burst into the office, frightening the employees, and then silently stared at the producers, making them uncomfortable. It was rumored that when the creators arrived for the meeting, they were told they could choose anyone as the Terminator, but not him. Be that as it may, Cameron's top priority was to find an actor for the role of Kyle Reese. Producers wanted to see a star that was rising in the US but already famous abroad. Their perfect candidate was Arnold Schwarzenegger, a bodybuilder who turned actor and made a name for himself in the films Stay Hungry and Conan the Barbarian. At the same time, the director also considered Mickey Rourke, Bruce Willis, Kurt Russell, Matt Dillon, Sting, and others for the role of Kyle. As for the Terminator, the candidates were Michael Douglas, Kevin Kline, Tom Selleck, Sylvester Stallone, and Mel Gibson. The latter two declined the proposal. According to Gibson, he simply felt he wasn't fit for the role. Also, the producers rejected O.J. Simpson's candidacy. They decided that he had too friendly an appearance for a ruthless cyborg. Cameron later sarcastically joked that after the high-profile trial, they might have reconsidered their decision. Meanwhile, the studio insisted on Arnold Schwarzenegger's approval, and Cameron agreed to meet the actor for lunch. The director's mood was extremely skeptical. He even intended to fight with Arnold to present him as someone impossible to work with. But the actor made a good impression and expressed several ideas about the Terminator. Although he was initially auditioning for the role of Reese, it was the main character that caught his attention. He had previously watched the science fiction film Westworld and was impressed by Yul Brynner's performance. So he told Cameron that the actor playing the Terminator should not act like a machine, but simply be a machine. James then changed his mind and offered the actor to play the cyborg. Schwarzenegger, however, had a contract prohibiting him from taking on other roles besides Conan. But the actor managed to negotiate with the franchise producer about the Cimmerian and agreed to Cameron's offer. It seemed that Arnold was very interested in the new project. He even went against the will of his agent, who advised against him playing villains. However, during the production of the film Conan the Destroyer in 1984, he spoke disdainfully about the Terminator in one of the interviews. He said it was some worthless movie that would take a couple of weeks to shoot. It turned out that initially he doubted the value of the project and planned to star in it just for the money and promotion in Hollywood. But since then, his opinion has changed, and now Arnold says that Cameron's film has become career-defining for him. By the way, he received a $750,000 paycheck. Having secured the role, the actor mainly ate iron-enriched foods for 6 weeks to prepare for filming, which is ironic as the Terminator is literally made of metal. Arnold also spent a lot of time at the shooting range to get used to the sound of gunfire and not blink when pulling the trigger. For a whole month, he practiced with weapons every day. He disassembled and assembled them blindfolded until it became automatic. As a result, he received a compliment from the magazine Soldier of Fortune for his realistic handling of weapons on camera, although they would usually mock such films. Meanwhile, the main contender for the role of Kyle Reese was Michael Biehn. Initially, the actor thought the film would be a silly, low-budget project about time travel, but his fears were dispelled by James Cameron. He showed detailed storyboards and passionately told him the story, which won being over. By the way, Michael would become a frequent collaborator with Cameron over the next few decades. Despite Bean's enthusiasm about the Terminator, the producers were confused by his pronunciation. The thing is, even before the first audition, the actor was working on a role in a production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, set in the Mississippi River Delta, and spoke with a southern accent without realizing it. Since the producers still liked Bean's acting, they invited him to a second audition where he corrected his speech and was approved for the role. After that, to understand the mindset of his character, Bean thoroughly studied the Polish resistance movement during World War II.
I'm here to help you. I'm Reese, Sergeant TechCom, BN 38416, assigned to protect you. You've been targeted for termination.
The candidates for the lead female character were Leah Thompson, Gina Davis, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Rosanna Arquette, and Daryl Hannah, but the latter declined in favor of the film Splash. Deborah Winger successfully passed the auditions, but later changed her mind and refused the role. Then, James Cameron invited Linda Hamilton, who had just finished her work for the horror film Children of the Corn. She had commitments to several other small projects and was hesitant about taking on the role of Sarah Connor, but Cameron persuaded her. In his opinion, the actress's image was perfect for Sarah. Also, although the role of Lieutenant Ed Traxler went to Paul Whitfield, it could have been played by Edward James Olmos or Louis Gossett Jr. Detective Hal Vukovich was played by Lance Henriksen as a token of gratitude for helping to get financing for the film.
How do I look?
Like shit, boss.
Yo, mama.
By the way, Cameron eventually cast Henriksen as an android in the film Aliens. Fun fact, co-writer William Wisher also got a small role. He played a patrol car policeman knocked out by the Terminator. But he wasn't the only one who got a role in the film thanks to his connections. For example, the Terminator attacking people in the underground shelter in the future was played by Franco Columbo, a two-time winner of the Mr. Olympia title and close friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Peter Kent, who was the stunt double for the lead actor, became Arnold's friend during the filming of The Terminator. Peter actually wanted to become an actor, but Cameron, noticing his resemblance to Arnold, offered him the position of a stunt performer. He had never done stunts before, but confidently lied to get the job, and since then, he worked as Schwarzenegger's double in many films. The filming process. The filming of The Terminator was supposed to start in early 1983 but was delayed for 9 months due to the prolonged production of the film Conan the Destroyer, with Schwarzenegger in the lead role. Cameron didn't waste his time. He signed a contract to write the screenplay for Rambo: First Blood Part 2, started working on the sequel to Alien, and revised the script for The Terminator. Meanwhile, the crew was working on several versions of the exoskeleton, a full human-sized version, an upper torso controlled by puppeteers, and a smaller copy for frame-by-frame animation. A part of the face was separately made in large size for the scenes where you closely see the camera eye. For the final scene, they created a mannequin made of dense foil with an eye in the form of a small red light bulb. By the way, the abs were made of 2 large pieces of polystyrene painted in steel color. The studio allocated $6.4 million for the production of the film. It was too little for the director's plans, although initially only $4 million had been allocated for the project. To stay within the budget, Cameron had to decide which scenes required special effects. He chose 2, the fight in the future at the beginning of the film and the appearance of the Terminator as an endoskeleton at the end. To save money, the director also often resorted to the so-called guerrilla filmmaking, when shooting takes place in real locations without obtaining a permission. The film crew and actors would arrive at the location, quickly shoot the scene, and leave before the police arrived. As a result, in some frames, you can see ordinary passers-by, completely unaware that they were being filmed. Such guerrilla work was often done at night. For example, once Cameron woke Schwarzenegger up at 3 a.m. and told him to come in costume for a reshoot of a scene. It took 2 hours and there was only the actor and the director on the improvised set. The very last scene with Sarah driving off into the desert was also shot without official permission. The team had to wait for the heat to intensify so that the hot air above the ground would start shimmering, and they failed to leave before the arrival of the highway patrol. producer Gail Ann Hurd convinced the officer that they were working on a film project for the University of California, Los Angeles, and he allowed them to finish. Such filming methods made the atmosphere tense. Cameron's temper didn't help either. He would get annoyed if approached with unconvincing ideas. The film crew even made t-shirts with the inscription, "You can't scare me, I work for James Cameron." Apart from that, the director was described as a kid in a candy store. He finally got the chance to direct a feature film from start to finish, so he approached the work with great zeal and enthusiasm. His experience working in Roger Corman's low-budget film studio in the late 70s and early 80s allowed him to independently solve many production issues. For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger was extremely surprised when the director demonstrated to him, without hesitation, how to perform one of the stunts. For most of the filming, the crew used handheld cameras. According to cinematographer Adam Greenberg, this helped give the film the energy that couldn't be achieved otherwise. But there was also a more obvious explanation. They tried to save money. For example, to avoid renting an expensive camera dolly, Greenberg filmed while sitting in a wheelchair which was pushed at high speed. For the same reason, the Terminator was shot in monophonic mode, although stereo sound already existed in 1984. The budget simply didn't allow the creators to get all the effects they wanted and shoot the film in stereo. However, later, when Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer acquired the rights to Cameron's film, a stereo soundtrack was created for the 2001 DVD release. Speaking about sound, the famous metal clang from the main theme was created by composer Brad Fiedel, who used a cast iron skillet pan. The voice from Sarah's answering machine message saying he won't be able to meet belongs to James Cameron.
Hi, Sarah. Dan Morsky. Something's come up and it looks like I won't be able to make it tonight. Just can't get out of it. Look, I'm really sorry. I'll make it up to you. Call you in a day or so, okay? Sorry. Bye.
Although Arnold Schwarzenegger played the lead role, he used his voice in just 16 scenes, uttering only 17 sentences in total. The famous phrase,
I'll be back,
was born out of disputes. Initially, it was written in the scripts as "I'll come back," but then "come" became "be." However, Schwarzenegger believed that without the contraction, it sounded more robotic and insisted on the version "I will be back." This was the only serious disagreement between the actor and the director. In the end, Cameron advised Schwarzenegger to stop rewriting the script, and he gave in. Far less heated disputes between them arose from the fact that the effect of smoke rising from Schwarzenegger's jacket was achieved using acid. The actor was nervous that the liquid would touch his skin and asked to find some other way, but eventually agreed. By the way, the smoke in another scene coming from the destroyed Terminator was simply someone from the film crew exhaling cigarette smoke. By the way, Arnold didn't like the prosthetics either because the red eye wires were flashing most of the time, obstructing his vision. He also feared that his eyebrows wouldn't grow back properly. For the film, he needed to shave them, but before that, the actor decided to insure them. Interestingly, the lead actor tried to avoid Linda Hamilton and Michael Biehn on set so that their friendly relationship wouldn't interfere with their acting. As for Linda, she had to work through pain because shortly before the start of filming, she had broken her ankle, so she had to tightly wrap it. Most of the chase scenes were postponed to the end of the shooting schedule because of her trauma, but the actress still had to endure the pain. There are lots of car chase scenes in the movie, and most of the time they were filmed at normal speed and then speeded up during editing. In fact, during such scenes, other cars with attached rotating lights would drive around to create the impression that the car being filmed was overtaking other light sources. Movie mistakes and errors. In The Terminator, there are several inconsistencies related to dates, numbers, and addresses. For example, in the scene where Kyle asks a policeman what day it is, he responded, May 12, Thursday. According to the credits, the action takes place in 1984, but the day of the week corresponds to 1983. By the way, shortly afterward, Kyle steals a coat and sneakers from a store, but later we see him wearing a t-shirt. The house number of the first Sarah Connor visited by the Terminator does not correspond to any of the 3 addresses he found in the phone book. Her house is number 14239, while in the directory, all numbers are 4 digits. When Sarah calls her mom and gives the phone number of the motel, the Terminator immediately calls back but dials a different number. In the scene where the Terminator intends to remove his eye and brings a knife to it, you can see that it has no blade. Apparently, the actor refused to bring sharp objects too close to his eye. During the scenes in the nightclub, you can also notice several mistakes. For example, during the Terminator's passage and the beginning of the shootout, the dancing people constantly change partners. First, you can see them with one partner and then with another. Some move around like the guy in the black and white t-shirt. At first, he dances near Sarah's table, but ends up behind the counter. When calling 911, Sarah throws a coin into the payphone, even though the emergency call is free. Sometimes, things that shouldn't appear in the frame do appear. For example, in the scene with the truck explosion, you can twice see the ropes used during the shooting to pull models. In the first case, the model truck, and in the second, Arnold Schwarzenegger's mannequin. A little later, when the Terminator rises from the fire, he has a shiny skull, although just a minute ago, it was heavily charred. The behavior of the Terminator during the mission raises many questions, as he could have dealt with Sarah much faster. His best opportunity was after the car accident when they were being pursued by the police. The girl was very close, but Schwarzenegger's character, for some reason, ran away from the car without completing the mission. Deleted scenes and bloopers. In addition to significantly cutting down the original idea due to the budget and technical limitations, James Cameron also removed an interesting detail about the Terminator from the film. In the director's original concept, the cyborg needed to eat to preserve human flesh. The script for the first film included a scene where he eats a chocolate bar, and in the third part, they even filmed a similar scene but removed it due to negative feedback from fans. Some scenes revealing the characters were also cut. In particular, one of the first deleted scenes more explicitly showed the difference between Sarah Connor at the beginning and the end of the film. There, the girl tries to smile at her reflection to psych herself up for work and says,
"Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'll be a waitress. I'm so wholesome I could puke."
This moment shows how insecure she is, which contrasts sharply with the story ending. Two other deleted scenes reveal the personality of Lieutenant Traxler. He is the only character besides Connor who believes Kyle's story about humanity's future. Thus, after talking to Sarah at the police station, he hints to his partner that he is willing to believe Reese. When the Terminator bursts into the station a minute before his death, he gives his gun and car keys to Kyle, asking him to protect Sarah at any cost. The editors also mercilessly cut one of the scenes where Kyle is laughing. When he and Sarah are in the motel, the girl starts tickling the guy. And by the way, the second time Kyle smiles is in the morning after that night, when Sarah playfully scares him. It's also interesting that all mentions of Cyberdyne Systems were removed from the first film. Sarah finds the name of the corporation in the phone book and suggests to Kyle that they should blow up the building. She realizes that appealing to the authorities is useless because it would get them arrested again and make it easier for the Terminator to find them. But she also can't hide and think about leaving no traces for her whole life. So she suggests preventing this horrible future from ever happening. Perhaps Cameron decided to save this plot twist for the second part, or maybe he cut the scene because of the subsequent dramatic moment. It's a scene with Kyle crying in the woods after a quarrel with Sarah, believing that the plan is unlikely to work and that the world will be destroyed. The director thought that this scene contradicted the personality of a hardened soldier. Also, Cyberdyne Systems is where the final battle takes place. In the deleted scene before the credits, the camera rises to the facade of the building and clearly shows the company name. So Reese did accept Sarah's offer, and they went to the address she found in the phone book. In the same scene, one of the employees finds the surviving microchip in the Terminator's wreckage and hands it over to the development department. The filming crew also had some bloopers. For example, one of the most epic scenes of the tanker truck explosion did not go smoothly. During the first take, the cable pulling the model truck tore off the front axle just when the series of explosions began, so the team had to create a new model from scratch for the reshoot. Worldwide recognition. In the worldwide box office, the Terminator grossed just over $78 million. In the USA, the amount was $38.4 million, which allowed it to enter the top 10 highest-grossing films of 1984. Perhaps the success would have been even more impressive if the film studio Orion had promoted the film more enthusiastically. The studio bosses saw The Terminator as a low-budget science fiction project that allowed them to make money quickly, so their promotional support was quite limited. Even 3 weeks after the premiere, when it became obvious that the film had great box office potential, they refused to increase promotion. Reportedly, Schwarzenegger is still angry with Orion because of this. The Saturn Awards, focusing on science fiction, fantasy, and horror, awarded Cameron's film for Best Science Fiction Film, Best Film Writing, and Best Film Makeup. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton, composer Brad Fiedel, and Cameron himself as director also received their nominations. But that was just the beginning. The 1984 movie has laid the foundation for the franchise that includes a series of action films, comic books, novels, and other content. The Terminator made it to Time magazine's top 10 films of the year and was included in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 2008 as a culturally significant movie. The cyborg portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger became the only character to be included in the American Film Institute's 100 Heroes and Villains list as both a villain in this film and a hero in the second installment. His phrase, "I'll be back," became iconic and repeatedly ranked high in quote ratings. It also became Schwarzenegger's signature phrase, as he repeated it in many of his films and public appearances during his gubernatorial campaign in California. While Iron Arnie fully embraced the Terminator's image, Linda Hamilton tried to distance herself from Sarah Connor, especially after filming the second movie. Unfortunately, she was also battling depression during that period and failed to completely shake off the shadow of the Terminator. It's difficult to overstate the influence of the Terminator on pop culture in the following years. Cameron elevated masculinity to a cult, and the image of an unyielding, emotionless, and flawlessly strong character was used in many other blockbuster films. At the same time, the director made a woman an action movie star. In fact, he didn't intend to make feminist statements, but simply wanted to be original. What impact did the film The Terminator have on you? Share your thoughts in the comments below.